And I wouldn't be a card-carrying consultant if I didn't say something about how I think you solve this problem. And so the resolution to this problem lies in how to separate making commitments from coping with uncertainty. And that sounds rather like jargon, to be sure. I hope by the time I'm done, I'll unpack that in a way that makes it at least potentially useful to you. So to begin, how can I make the claim that strategic uncertainty has been ignored? Oh, I should just check. Where I need to be done by 9?
9. Just after 9.
9? Okay, good. So strategic uncertainty has been ignored. That's kind of a bold claim to make, and it's probably worthwhile defending that view. So let me start by saying a few words about what I think the state of the art in strategic management looks like today. How many people know this book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins? Yeah? Everybody, not surprising. This is actually a very old cover shot. It says 800,000 copies, so that's over 4 million now. Yeah. Trust me, I should be so lucky. That's unbelievably successful in the world of business books. It really, I think it's second now only to In Search of Excellence, and In Search of Excellence has been out for 25 years. Yeah, it's been out for 7. So an incredibly successful book, has a lot to say that resonates deeply with a lot of people. It's based on tremendously careful and extensive research. And I think Good to Great is evidence of a great many things. Hold that. Not the least of which is that all the best business books have red covers. Remember that. So, that said, I don't think I'm doing Collins a disservice if I suggest there is a central message that comes out for all the filigree and all the nuance in what he has to say. There's a central message that emerges, and for me, that central message is the importance of vision. Successful companies, what he calls a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. Right? If organizations are going to be successful, they have to articulate a clear and compelling vision of the future that they want to create for themselves, something that motivates and inspires everybody in the organization. And then collectively, you have to be absolutely resolute in your commitment to making that vision come true. You have to be realistic about the obstacles that lie in the way, right? This isn't about putting your head in the sand, I'm not listening to you. No. You have to be in tune to your environment. But fundamentally, his research suggests pretty strongly that success lies in just never taking no for an answer. Right? Okay, so vision as a central component of successful strategy. This is Michael Porter's book, Competitive Strategy. People know this one? Generally get fewer hands with this one. I mean, if you've ever taken an MBA, you've been asked to read this book, right? Whether or not you did is up to you, but you were asked. And competitive strategy is really the definition of what they call in literary criticism the seminal text in the strategy field. It was published in 1980. I think it's been gone through something like 29 reprintings. It's been translated into 65 languages. It might be the other way around, but if you count it. Right? I mean, incredibly successful. Has really defined the strategic conversation for most of us, even if we don't know it. Kind of like Monsieur Jourdain discovered he was speaking prose all his life, and we're all actually students of Michael Porter, even if we don't recognize it. And again, an incredibly carefully argued, carefully researched book, evidence of a great many things, not the least of which is that all the best business books are written by people named Michael. And once again, I think there's a central thread that emerges from this work. And for me, it's the importance of commitment to strategic success. It's not enough just to have an intellectual or an emotional vision of the future. You have to back it up with something. And what Porter demonstrates to me pretty convincingly is that if you want to have a successful strategy, you have to make serious commitments today. Right? You have to write checks with lots of zeros on them. You have to commit your organization to developing certain capabilities to serving particular markets better than the competition. And you have to maintain that commitment over time. You can't sort of set a strategy on Monday and change it on Thursday. You have to stick with it over time because it's only the commitment over time that you're able to defeat competitive imitation. Right? It's one thing to find a great corner for your lemonade stand, but if the competition can set up across the street and compete away all the value you create, well then where's the fun in that? Right? If you want to keep the value you create, you have to commit over time to creating it in a way that makes it difficult for your competitors to imitate. Yeah? So vision and commitment. These aren't just randomly chosen characteristics of successful strategies. They are in a very real sense the definition of what makes for a good strategy. Now the reason I think it's so important to have this kind of a checklist is because if the only way you know whether or not a strategy is successful is by observing its results, well, you really haven't learned much about what makes for a good strategy. I've had this conversation a number of times. We said, wait a minute, why can't we just define successful strategies in terms of strategies that are successful? Maybe if you're a PhD student, but if you're a real manager and have to make a choice, you have to pick your strategy before you know the results. And so as a consequence, you need some way to know. Is this going to be a good strategy? Are my odds of success increased or decreased by building a strategy with these sorts of characteristics? So my vote, the two most important components, vision and commitment. And I've given you some idea why. The problem is that the characteristics I have nominated, and indeed any other set of characteristics that anyone else might care to nominate, I think won't pass the following test, which is it's not universally the case that organizations with strategies that pass those tests end up successful. Let me give you a quick example of one organization in particular, and that's Sony. Sony's hardly a paragon of failure. Yeah, I mean, Sony's an organization that's been around for well over 50 years, and it's given us some of the most successful products in the world with consumer electronics. And they were one of the lead innovators on the compact disc, along with Philips. They created the Sony Walkman. They created the compact audio cassette, or I should say, back in the late 60s. And of course, they gave us the PlayStation 2, one of the most successful game consoles ever. And they won the DVD battle for high def with the Blu-ray DVD standard. Right? So an enormously successful organization. But I don't want to talk about their successes. I want to talk about their failures, and one in particular, which was Betamax. People remember Betamax? Yeah, have a Betamax? When the book came out in February of last year, one of the first talks I gave was at Stanford at the MBA program there. And so I thought, oh, I know, I'll involve the audience. I said, anybody remember Betamax? And I realized nobody in the room was over 24. So at that point, I had to accept the fact that I'm old. In any event, Betamax is one of those examples that people talk about when they want to feel clever, right? Because they think, gee, look at those schmucks at Sony. I mean, everything you could do wrong, they did wrong. I'd never be that stupid, right? We sort of go back and we look at it through that lens of hindsight, and I think that's enormously unfair. Because when I took a closer look at what happened with Betamax, it seemed to me that all the choices that Sony made, as seen from the perspective of when they had to make them, which is really the only perspective that makes any sense to me, they were actually not just reasonable decisions, they were brilliant decisions. Sony's strategy for Betamax passes all the tests. There are three things that people accuse Sony of having done wrong. First of all, they say that Sony provoked a standards war. They said, bad Sony, shouldn't you have known better than to have a standards war? Well, sometimes standards wars work out pretty well if you win, right? Just ask them about the whole Blu-ray thing and how that turned out. So if you come out on top, it's actually not such a bad deal. And in fact, when it came to Betamax, they went to market with a consumer-based video cassette recorder in the late 60s in collaboration with Matsushita, precisely in order to avoid a standards war. You know what happened? Sony designed a killer machine that Matsushita couldn't make. And so as a result, they had to constantly back off the performance profile of their VCR, and what resulted was the U-Matic. And I'm sure nobody here remembers the U-Matic. You might have actually remember seeing one in grade school. Remember those big, clunky VCRs that were on the big racks that they wheeled around from classrooms? That was a U-Matic. Those things were enormous. They were the size of a Volkswagen, right? They cost twice as much. The quality was awful. And that was not the best machine Sony could make. It was the best machine Matsushita could make, which was Sony's partner. And so as a consequence, Sony said, well, wait a minute. Last time we tried this in collaboration with Matsushita in order to avoid a standards war, we failed. So, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So they decided, no, we're going along this time. So did they provoke a standards war, or did they learn from their mistakes? The data are ambiguous. Second thing people give Sony a hard time for is having devoted themselves to time-shifting television programming. Right? The whole idea of the Betamax and the way they marketed it is that you could essentially record programs and then watch them when you felt like it. Now, we take that for granted today, of course, but in 1974, that was a revolution. People have said, well, wait a minute, it turned out to be all about movies, and Sony should have known that. Well, newsflash, Sony actually had figured out that you could take previously recorded movies and watch them on the VCR. Problem was the Hollywood studios, which would have been the source of the movies that you would watch on the VCR, had decided that they were afraid of, ready, piracy. And so they refused to make any movies available. In fact, they collectively launched a class action suit against Sony, hoping to have the Betamax declared illegal. Right? It was going to become a class 5 substance right up there with heroin. You could get sort of 5 to 10 if you got some crack on the dining room table or a beta under the TV. Seriously. And so as a consequence, the notion that somehow you're going to build a strategy around movies when your sole supplier is taking you to court, well, probably not such a good idea. So did they make a wrong bet, or did they make the only one available to them? And finally, Sony decided that they would focus on cutting-edge technology. They'd have a product differentiation strategy. They would be the best technology out there. People look at that and say, they should have known it was going to be about low prices and market share and market penetration and rapid adoption. Fair enough, except for the fact that at that point, Sony had had many successes with product differentiation, and in fact would continue to have many successes with product differentiation. And one of the most successful pieces of consumer electronics of the last 10 years is, of course, the iPod. And when the iPod came out, it was $550. Everybody looked at it and said, this thing is way too expensive, way too heavy, there's no music available for it, and no one will buy it. I'll show you articles. I mean, the verdict was unanimous. Don't always get it right. Yeah? So was Sony's decision foolhardy, or did it simply turn out to be the wrong one? I think that's an important distinction to make.